Ебатого Люсю! Блядь!
For months, Donald Trump had been telling the international community,
I said, you don't have the cards. Don't forget, I inherited this war. I would have never, this war never would have happened. I inherited this war. And I thought he should have made a deal.
In the middle of rising political tension, Vladimir Putin continued projecting an image of control. But that image cracked when Ukrainian long-range drones struck the Chatura thermal power plant, one of the most important energy facilities supporting the Moscow region. Witnesses captured Russian soldiers firing desperately from hotel windows, trying to intercept the incoming drones. Before emergency crews even finished their initial response, a second wave struck the same facility at dawn. This wasn't just another attack. It reached within 120 kilometers of the Kremlin itself. Millions of Muscovites woke up to a new and uncomfortable reality. Smoke on the horizon, trains halted, metro lines frozen, and neighborhoods experiencing sudden blackouts. With a plant capable of generating 1,500 megawatts knocked offline, the impact spread through factories, hospitals, and thousands of homes. Volodymyr Zelensky had long signaled that Ukraine would not limit its response to the front lines. The strikes demonstrated just how far Ukraine's reach had grown. For Russia's citizens, the question became unavoidable. If a key power station so close to the Kremlin could be hit twice in a single morning, what else was vulnerable? The shockwave across Russia's strategic network. The strikes on Chatura were only the beginning. Within hours, additional attacks were reported across multiple strategic regions of Russia, from Kursk to Oryol, and most significantly, Ryazan. Ryazan hosts one of Russia's largest oil refineries, a facility crucial for fueling Moscow and its surrounding areas. This refinery had been targeted several times during the year, but the latest strike forced a full shutdown. Nearly 40% of Moscow's fuel supply was suddenly disrupted, leading to temporary airport closures and widespread transportation delays. In Kursk, more than 16,000 residents lost electricity. A thermal power station in Ryazan was also struck the same night, adding to the growing pressure on Russia's energy grid. Meanwhile, trains, the lifeline of Russia's economy, began experiencing delays and shortages. With 700,000 workers and responsibility for transporting coal, fuel, and military equipment across vast distances, the railway system is essential to Vladimir Putin's war effort. But internal reports described unpaid wages, equipment shortages, and rising frustration. At the same time, another image began circulating widely: Volodymyr Zelensky meeting openly with soldiers near the front lines, while Vladimir Putin was shown holding briefings inside a fortified underground facility beneath Moscow. The visual contrast fueled new conversations among Russian citizens about leadership, stability, and the true direction of the conflict, the leadership divide. As images circulated worldwide, a defining contrast emerged between the two leaders at the center of the conflict. Volodymyr Zelensky, frequently seen visiting Ukrainian soldiers at the front, appeared in open and unprotected settings, talking with troops, sharing tea, and walking through field positions. These scenes reinforced the message that he remained physically present with his military. Vladimir Putin, however, was shown conducting critical meetings from a reinforced underground facility beneath Moscow. Although such precautions may be standard during high-risk periods, the imagery created a symbolic divide inside Russia. Many citizens who were living through blackouts, fuel shortages, or transportation disruptions began to question why their president appeared to be communicating from below ground. The continued strikes on energy hubs and refineries intensified internal strain. Social media filled with clips of burning infrastructure, halted metro lines, and long queues at fuel stations. Repair teams struggled to keep up with repeated damage. Inside the Russian railway sector, the backbone of the country's logistics network, conditions worsened. Reports emerged of delayed salaries, missing parts, and overwhelming workloads. As frustration grew, internal leaks from military personnel also increased, with more than 5% of soldiers anonymously sharing information about low morale and supply issues. For an economy that depends heavily on rail transport, from Siberian coal to ammunition shipments, any slowdown carried serious consequences. The war was no longer just about positions on a map. It was about whether Russia's internal systems could withstand sustained pressure. In this environment, the image of Putin in an underground bunker took on new meaning. It became part of a broader conversation inside Russia about leadership, responsibility, and the growing realization that the conflict was reaching deeper into civilian life. A shift in strategy. As Russia focused on stabilizing internal disruptions, Ukraine adjusted its approach under President Zelensky, applying a strategy that military analysts later described as asymmetric pressure. Instead of focusing primarily on trench warfare, Ukraine targeted the systems that sustain Russia's military and economy. The strategy rested on three pillars. 1. Energy disruption. By striking power stations and energy nodes, Ukraine reduced the effectiveness of Russian radar, air defense networks, and communication systems. Every blackout forced Russian resources to shift away from offensive operations and toward domestic protection. 2. Economic impact. Hits on refineries and fuel corridors weakened the ruble, increased transportation costs, and slowed industrial output. The Ryazan refinery shutdown was one of the most significant examples, directly affecting Moscow's fuel supply. 3. Psychological pressure strikes near Moscow demonstrated that long-range attacks could reach areas once believed to be fully secure. This challenged a long-standing perception among Russian citizens that the capital was immune to the consequences of war. Together, these elements reshaped the conflict's dynamics. When international discussions resumed, including the 28-point plan referenced in Washington, Ukraine entered the diplomatic arena with leverage. Zelensky could negotiate not only with territorial considerations in mind, but also with the demonstrated ability to target Russia's strategic infrastructure if necessary. For Vladimir Putin, the situation became increasingly complex. Russia faced pressure on multiple fronts: military losses, economic strain, internal frustration, and a logistics network struggling under repeated stress. Keeping the narrative of control intact became harder as the conflict began affecting day-to-day life for millions across the country. The war had shifted into a stage where internal stability, infrastructure resilience, and public perception were as decisive as troop numbers or battlefield positions. A nation under strain. As winter tightened its grip, Russia faced a combination of pressures not seen in decades. Power outages in major regions, including areas surrounding Moscow, made daily life increasingly unpredictable. Families dealt with cold apartments, inconsistent heating, and rising prices for basic goods like fuel, eggs, and dairy. These were not abstract economic indicators. They were changes felt directly in kitchens, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Russian history shows that internal tension often grows quietly until something triggers a shift. Analysts noted parallels circulating online. Food shortages in 1917, economic collapse in 1991, and prolonged military strain in Afghanistan during the late 1980s. The comparison wasn't about ideology, it was about the patterns of stress that appear when daily life becomes uncertain. Meanwhile, frustration simmered among Russia's essential workforce. Railway employees, refinery workers, and repair crews were under intense pressure. With hundreds of thousands of workers involved in logistics and infrastructure, even a small decline in morale could ripple through the wider system. On top of this, military families were pushing for more transparency about losses, and local officials struggled to address community concerns about heating, wages, and energy stability. The conflict was no longer a distant geopolitical issue. It had become woven into everyday life. The Russian public now faced a growing question. How long could the system endure these simultaneous strains without significant internal consequences? The road ahead. As discussions continued between Washington, Kiev, and European capitals, the international landscape became increasingly divided. Donald Trump viewed Vladimir Putin's negotiating position from afar, interpreting it as stronger than many European governments believed it to be. But European leaders, particularly those in Eastern Europe, held the opposite view. Their stance was shaped not by theory, but by historical experience with Russian power dynamics. European intelligence assessments argued that rewarding Putin with territorial concessions could risk future instability. From their perspective, accepting a pause in the conflict without true resolution might only delay broader security problems. For Ukraine under Zelensky, The evolving situation brought both risk and leverage. The ability to strike Russia's strategic infrastructure strengthened Kyiv's position in diplomatic discussions, but also risked provoking new escalations if talks failed. The war had entered a stage where diplomacy, long-range capability, and internal stability were all intertwined. Inside Russia, the question remained whether the government could maintain public confidence while handling economic pressure, infrastructure strain, and the uncertainty created by continuous strikes. The outcome of the conflict would not be shaped only by what happened on the battlefield, but also by what happened inside Russia itself, in its cities, its logistics networks, and its political institutions. And with each new development, the stakes grew higher for all parties involved. If you want more clear, unbiased breakdowns of global events and how they shape the world we live in, subscribe to MGE, where we analyze the story behind the headlines.